Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Coast to Coast Hockey. Today, we're doing a deep dive into everything to do with the Washington Capitals. My name's Cameron.
I'm Noel.
And I'm Nick.
Let's get into it.
There were only three moves that the Capitals made this offseason, and that was bringing in Joel Edmondson, Max Pacioretty, and Matthew Phillips. More on those guys in a second.
And while there were only three additions, there were also very few subtractions to the team as well this offseason. Matt Irwin, Connor Brown, Craig Smith, and Gabriel Carlson left the team.
Edmondson was acquired via trade with the Montreal Canadiens. The Canadiens do retain 50% of his salary, and the Capitals sent over a third-round pick and a seventh-round pick. So a nice bit of business there. His cap hit is 1.75 million, and he has 1 year left and will become a UFA. He really doesn't put up much points. He's more of a shutdown defenseman. He had 112 hits and 149 blocks last season. And he is a Stanley Cup champion. He did win it with the Blues, so he brings another veteran piece to this already pretty old team.
The next big addition for the Washington Capitals is Max Pacioretty. Now, this is a super risky bet here. He's already suffered two ACL injuries in the past couple seasons, so staying healthy has been a massive issue for him. In the past 3 seasons, he's been limited to 5 games, 39 games, and 19 games. But in those games, he's put up 46 goals. So this is a player who has trouble staying healthy, but when he's healthy, he's a dynamic goal scorer. Uh, the last relatively fully healthy season he played, he had 32 goals in 71 games. So he'll be a huge bump to this Washington Capitals lineup when he's able to come back on November 2nd.
And now on the younger front, we've got Matthew Phillips, the 25-year-old, sort of career AHLer at this point, but that should not be due to production. He has put up back-to-back 30-goal AHL campaigns. This past year, he finished fifth in AHL scoring with 76 points in 66 games. And this is a guy that should be cracking NHL lineups, but if you look at his height there, 5'7" and 140 pounds, this guy is deterred by his coaches, such as Daryl Sutter in previous tenures.
Moving on from the big additions to the future outlook, pretty interesting prospect pool here with the recently drafted Ryan Leonard, Andrew Cristal, Ivan Miroshnichenko, Hendrix Lapierre, and Vincent Ioro.
And looking at their draft capital, they still have a fair amount of their own picks, and they also have acquired Boston and Colorado's second-round pick for 2025. That was the Garnet Hathaway trade and Dmitry Orlov, and also, I believe, Lars Eller. So as we move up in these standings in our order, we're going to see less and less draft picks for teams as they are more competitive. They're going to be actively spending these draft picks, but Washington's kind of in a middle spot, so they still have a lot of their picks and are looking to land some big prospects with them.
Now on to the prospect spotlight for the Washington Capitals. We're highlighting three of their best prospects today: Ryan Leonard, Andrew Cristal, and Ivan Miroshnichenko. First of all, with Ryan Leonard, this is the most recent first-round pick by the Washington Capitals, as you can see at 8th overall there in 2023. This is a guy that's played with the U.S. National Development Team, and as I've said before, as most of the National Development Team players do, he's put up way over a point per game playing against those U.S. teams, and 51 goals in 57 games is more than impressive for this player. This is a 6 foot, 190-pound player, and at a young age of 18, he is ready to find his groove in college, potentially in the future, and then find his way into the Washington Capitals lineup as a strong goal-scoring winger or center. On the other side of the playmaking, we've got Andrew Cristal. This is a guy that I consider to be an utmost playmaker first, despite the 40 goals almost you see there in the WHL last year. He fell to 40th overall in the second round of 2023 draft, which many found to be surprising. He was probably one of the top 15 players in the draft, and we could see that prove true in the near future. He put up 95 points in 54 games in the WHL. Not many players are doing that. He led his team by 16 points. So he's not just carrying alongside somebody else. This is a guy who's carrying his own team and his own weight, for that matter. And despite being only 5'10 and 175 pounds, this is a highly skilled, crafty player who I could see turning heads in the NHL once he makes it there in the future. The third player of mention is Ivan Miroshnichenko, and this is a guy who's been through many hurdles to get to where he is today. He has battled Hodgkin's lymphoma, which took him out a whole season. It's a type of cancer that affects the lymphatic system. Basically, luckily it's curable, and now he's back in the league. But this is something that no one has to deal with in the professional hockey scene. So this is a guy who's had to overcome so much to get to where he is today. As you can see, in the KHL and MHL, he's put up varying numbers. The MHL being an easier league for his age, and the KHL likely with less ice time. So I can see him being a really good part to Washington's future, and it's very happy to see that he is healthy and playing some good hockey again today.
Just one last point with Miroshnichenko. He's already going to be playing in the AHL next year, so that is super good news for the Washington Capitals because often with these Russian players, one of the most difficult parts is getting them over to North America. Moving on from the future to the present, we're going to take a look at the projected lineup for the Washington Capitals, starting with the forwards. So that first line, it's the first line they've had for a few years now, varying with injuries and whatnot. But Alex Ovechkin, Evgeny Kuznetsov, and Tom Wilson. It's a pretty great line when it's going at full blast. Like Ovechkin is pretty much money in the bank for 40 goals every season. Kuznetsov has had some difficult seasons recently, so he's looking to bounce back. And Tom Wilson, the big thing for him is just staying healthy. That second line there, obviously we're projecting out a little bit for when they're going to have Max Pacioretty back, but it's a pretty solid second line. It's a bit older, so it might not be very fast, but with Max Pacioretty, Nicholas Backstrom, and TJ Oshie, that's three vets who know how to get it done at the NHL level and will probably perform really well together. Interesting third line as well with Sonny Milano, Dylan Strome, and Anthony Mantha. Strome is a guy to look to move up in the lineup if Kuznetsov or Backstrom are struggling. Obviously, he was such a high pick, third overall by the Coyotes a number of years ago. So he's definitely got some upside and has performed pretty well since he's gotten to Washington and even before that in Chicago. Mantha is a guy that's been in some trade rumors. I think they're trying to unload his salary cap, but we'll see if that ends up happening. And then on the fourth line there, we got Alexei Protas, Nick Dowd, and Nicholas Aube-Kubel. A pretty solid fourth line, but not really going to blow anybody out of the water. Protas is a guy that I like particularly. 6'6", 225-pound power forward who's only 22 years old and really has the chance to become an elite bottom six forward in the NHL, in my opinion. And then you see the extras there. We got Matthew Phillips, the new acquisition, Joe Snevely, and Connor McMichael.
That second line is really held together by tape. I just want to say all three of those guys suffer from pretty serious injuries, and we'll see if it lasts.
Yeah, absolutely. And on to the defense end of the Washington Capitals, we're looking at Martin Fehervary and John Carlson at the top, followed by Rasmus Sandin and Nick Jensen, and then Joel Edmondson, the new acquisition, alongside Trevor Van Riemsdyk. Now, I look at this D-core as a good mix of young and old. You've got players like Fehervary and Sandin matched up with some veterans, including John Carlson and Nick Jensen. And you've got a third pair with the offensive-minded Trevor Van Riemsdyk and the defensive-minded Joel Edmondson. So this is a good turnaround for the team with that battle some injuries last year.
And their starting goalie is Stanley Cup champion Darcy Kemper with the Colorado Avalanche. He won it 2 years ago, and he had a somewhat, I don't know, questionable year last year. I guess it's kind of hard to live up to those expectations of winning the Stanley Cup with Colorado and then moving to a slightly weaker team in Washington. But he still had a solid year. He was injured a bit too, and Charlie Lindgren had to fill in, and he also did a fairly good job. Hunter Shepard is down the depth chart. So all in all, it's a fairly solid goalie tandem between Darcy Kemper and Charlie Lindgren.
Moving on from the lineup to the storyline surrounding this team. The first one is pretty obvious. It's on everybody's mind. Just the chase that's going on with Alexander Ovechkin and Wayne Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky's all-time record of NHL goals is 894. And Ovechkin every year is getting closer and closer to that total. He's now sitting at 822. So he's 72 goals off. And if you figure he's on around a 40-goal pace for the next 2 seasons, he'll pass him not this season, but next year.
I think it's kind of funny how the whole like focus of this team now is getting one player, one achievement. Like it almost seems like they don't even care about winning anymore. Their sole focus, well, obviously do care about winning, but to an extent, it's the sole focus is getting Ovi this record, and I would love to see it happen.
Yeah, since he's got his ring from 2018, you're looking at a team that is more so, rooting for this guy at the same time. You want him to stay healthy. We're curious to see how the top six of that lineup stays healthy to help him reach those goal totals that can help him get 72 in the next couple seasons before he ages out. But it'll be interesting
Hmm.
to see how fast he gets it and who he gets it alongside.
It's just crazy to me the consistency of this player. I can't remember exactly how old he is. He's 36, 37 around there. Uh, but just the fact that he's been able to continue to put up 40 to 50 goals every single season at this age is just an incredible feat. Like, it's been so much fun to watch the better part of his career as an NHL fan. And I think it will be great for the NHL and growing the game once a Russian player passes that goal total there.
He plays such a rugged style of hockey too, with his physicality, and I hope it doesn't take a toll too much on his body. I mean, the Russian machine never breaks, right? So I think health is the big question for Ovi, and if he passes this record, he just has to stay healthy. It's a matter of if, not when,
Yeah.
Yeah.
or when,
When,
not
not if.
if.
All good, all good.
And then, like, specifically coming up to this season, this is a guy that has done the same thing for many, many years, especially on the power play. You're looking at a guy shooting from the exact same spot practically for all
His
of his
office.
goals. His office, Ovi's office. And he's still making it work year after year. Goalies are still dumbfounded by his shot.
Some of the videos on YouTube of watching him play off the puck is it's pretty funny because he pretty much does nothing. He just gets there, loads up the shot, and it goes in more often than not. Moving on to our next storyline here, it's pretty substantial trade rumors surrounding the Washington Capitals in the form of Evgeny Kuznetsov. This is a player recent and who's struggled a bit recently. Last season, he only put up 12 goals and 55 points, which really isn't good for a player who used to hover around 70 points every season. He's also got a pretty big contract with 2 years left at 7.8 million. So that's definitely going to be an issue in trying to move him. But the Washington Capitals have made it known that they're looking to bring another player into their top six forward group, uh, which makes sense when you look at the injury history of some of the players like Tom Wilson, uh, TJ Oshie, Nicholas Backstrom, and Max Pacioretty. So getting some extra security there makes a lot of sense. In terms of the teams who have or are looking at Kuznetsov, I definitely think that the Colorado Avalanche took a spin around this before they made the move for Ryan Johansson. So that seems to be out of the window. But in terms of other teams that you guys can think of that would be interested in a player like Kuznetsov, what comes to mind?
For me, I'd say the Boston Bruins with the retirement of Patrice Bergeron. That center depth pretty much gets as weak as it gets in the NHL. You've got Charlie Coyle, Pavel Zacha, and Morgan Geekie as your top three centermen. You've got some great wingers to complement that with Marchand, Pasternak, and the name brand guys. But losing Bergeron and Krejci are two huge centermen that you need to fill the hole of. And someone like Kuznetsov might be able to fill that spot as a playmaker with those guys, such as Pasternak being a straight shooter.
He also fits the age of the Boston Bruins too, age
100%.
window.
Just
A
with
team. Oh,
Oh,
sorry. You
sorry.
go.
Just with that, I was gonna say, wonder if the Bruins would be willing to move a guy like Jake DeBrusk. Obviously, I think you'd need a lot more coming from the Capitals, but it would kind of make sense from both teams because it would get top six players moved into both of those lineups.
Yeah, another team that's also looking for a top six centerman would be the Minnesota Wild. I know they have lots of cap issues, so it'd be really hard for them to fit Kuznetsov in, but they really need someone to be playing with Kaprizov and fellow countrymen. So Kuznetsov is a player they could take a look at. And there has been some, um, I don't know, substance abuse issues for Kuznetsov in the past, some off ice issues. So I wonder if teams will take a look at that before making a trade for him.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all great points. At the end of the day, he's a Stanley Cup champion, and I think the offensive upside from him is there. It's just a matter of whether he can tap into it or not. And I guess we'll see this season. I think that will really dictate his trade value as well. So, moving on to our next storyline here. we have the Tom Wilson extension. So this is a very controversial contract extension. I mean, I've seen uh, both sides argued on Twitter. Some people love it, particularly Washington fans. A lot of people are commenting saying, well, come back and talk to me in 7 years, in the sixth and seventh years of this deal. So if you're unaware, it was a 7 year, $6.5 million AAV contract. Last season, Tom Wilson was limited to 33 games. He had 13 goals and 22 points, which is probably one of the best career paces he's ever been on. In terms of the physicality he brings, he had 97 hits last year in 33 games. So over 3 hits per game. This is one of the premier power forwards in the NHL right now. He's 6'4", 220 pounds, but in terms of the offense, he's only got a career high of 52 points and 24 goals. So as a player who's had a torn ACL, a broken ankle, the Washington Capitals are making a huge risk by taking this bet on him at $6.5 million for 7 years.
Yeah, Tom Wilson does have some great chemistry with Alex Ovechkin, so that could play a part as to why they brought him back as Ovi's chasing that goal record. But is Ovi's game going to last 7 years to the extent of this contract? And he already has injury concerns, so it seems like a massive risk to give all this money 7 years of Tom Wilson, who is a unicorn in the NHL with his physicality and offense. But I mean, as you said, Ken, 52 points. It kind of caught me by surprise when I heard that.
Yeah, there are very few players that do specifically what Tom Wilson does in the NHL, but most of those players are making closer to league minimum than what Tom Wilson is making. Tom Wilson does provide an extra level of offense compared to those, the Ryan Reeves of the league or the Wayne Simmonses, but you're looking at a guy who has injuries in his lower body that could beg the question that his skating could have an issue in the latter years of this contract. I wonder if he's going to be able to keep up and prove himself to be that $6.5 million player in the future.
When I look at this extension, all I can really think about is Milan Lucic and how his contract ended up looking in Edmonton and Calgary. I think we're going to end up in a very similar situation here where they've really given probably 3 years too long on this extension. If this was a 4 year contract, I think it'd be fine, but that 6.5 million in years 5, 6, and 7 is really going to come back to haunt the Washington Capitals, in my opinion. It's going to be probably a bottom six player at that point with very little offensive upside. And I think a lot of the Washington Capitals fans maybe see him as the next captain of the team, but I don't know if that really warrants the cap hit.
I mean, he doesn't even have an assistant right now.
No.
As we speak, it's Ovechkin with the captaincy, Backstrom at the A, and then Carlson and Edmondson now have
Yeah.
A's. So even the newly acquired Edmondson takes that role from what Wilson could be. If Washington commits to this as a long term thing, I'm really curious what they think their window is, because if they think their window right now, despite picking eighth overall and finishing so poorly last season, they want to go for the playoffs now. They want to go for the last hurrah with Ovechkin. Maybe that's the case. So they pay him for the couple of years now. But the fact that they gave him such a long term after a potential Ovechkin retirement and all these older players moving out speaks kind of weirdly to the situation in Washington.
Yeah. So it's definitely going to be a fun one to watch, and I'm definitely of the sentiment that this is really going to hurt the Washington Capitals in a few years' time. Um, but moving on from the storylines to our final segment here, uh, we're going to just do a broad overview of the offseason and the season for the Washington Capitals. So beginning with a grade for the Washington Capitals offseason, it's going to be a C plus. Uh, I mean, the Joel Edmondson trade was an incredible piece of business to get a really solid third or fourth defenseman in at such a reduced cap hit of 1.75 million for only a third round pick and a seventh round pick. I really can't believe there wasn't more interest around the league to drive that price up to a second round pick possibly or something like that. But just a great piece of business there. But what really brings it down is the next biggest move they made was Max Pacioretty, which could end up being an incredible move, but it just carries so much risk. And then the Tom Wilson extension is just putting that into this offseason really brings that grade down. As we said, the term there is just terrifying. So hopefully it doesn't come back to bite the Washington Capitals in the butt, but only time will tell there. In terms of the actual on ice grades, for offensive strength, sorry, we're going to give them a B. That's a very old forward group with a pretty underwhelming bottom six, but the high upside is there with Ovechkin, Backstrom, Kuznetsov, Oshie. All those guys produce every year, uh, except for Kuznetsov, sorry. And then defensive strength, B minus. Again, as Nick said, good mix of old and young. I definitely look for Faravari and Sandin as young guys who could potentially take a big step and bring this grade up to a B or even a B plus if they really develop as we think they could. And then in terms of goaltending, I'd like to give them a higher grade here because Kemper and Lindgren are a decent tandem. But just after what we saw last year from Kemper, and we know he's going to get most of the starts, I'm a little bit weary. So going to give them a B minus there. Hopefully Kemper overperforms and moves that up to a B or even a B plus because I definitely think he has the potential to do that. In terms of the future, uh, it looks a little bleak for the Washington Capitals. It's going to be a B minus just because they don't have really any young players outside of Faravari and Sandin in their lineup that are notable. Maybe Strome as well. And their prospect pool is developing. It's coming along, so that puts it in the B range. But the lack of young players is not great for this team.
The Capitals won the Stanley Cup a couple of years ago, but ever since then they've kind of been on the decline. Their players are only getting older and more injury prone, so that's why we have them finishing sixth in our wild card Eastern Conference standings. They're still going to be competitive. They're still going to score goals with Ovechkin, but I feel like they're, as we said, more chasing Ovechkin's goal record now than being a very like pushing for the playoffs or Stanley Cup.
Yeah, I think it's the lack of depth, right? So
Hmm.
at the end of the day, with our individual rankings here, Nick had them ranked 24th. Noel and I both had them ranked 22nd. So that's going to result in an aggregate standing of 24th overall in the NHL. So obviously, not exactly where this aging team wants to be, but who knows? Maybe they could sniff the playoffs. It seems unlikely, but nothing's impossible. So thanks so much for watching, guys. Uh, really having fun doing this. Make sure you guys come back for the next video and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.